Samantha Hayes, a well-known entrepreneur and owner of one of the country's leading luxury airlines, sat comfortably in the first-class section of her flagship aircraft. Her simple, elegant black dress and a gold bracelet sparkled in the cabin's warm lighting, making her blend seamlessly with the other well-dressed passengers. To the untrained, Samantha looked like any other wealthy traveler enjoying the perks of the airline's premium service. However, what the other passengers didn't know was that Samantha was the one who owned the airline, the very entity that provided them with such luxury. As she sat back in her plush seat, Samantha couldn't help but observe the passengers around her. Despite her status, she chose to remain unnoticed, quiet, composed, blending into the ambience of the flight. Over the years, she had learned to navigate the complex world of business by staying out of the limelight whenever possible. Being understated allowed her to make decisions without drawing unnecessary attention to herself. But as she sat there, surrounded by the hum of the aircraft, she was blissfully unaware that her peaceful journey was about to be interrupted by someone who didn't recognize her as the owner of the airline. Samantha had spent years building her airline from the ground up, turning it into a powerhouse in the industry. She was no stranger to the challenges that came with being a woman in a male-dominated field, but she had learned to deal with obstacles by demonstrating quiet resilience and unwavering confidence. She had seen it all: disrespect, skepticism, and people doubting her ability to lead. But now, as the owner of a thriving business, she had earned her place in the industry, and she didn't expect to be questioned or second-guessed. Little did she know, her next encounter would be one where assumptions based on appearances would lead to an unexpected confrontation, one that would test her composure and resolve. The flight attendant, Maria Taylor, would soon approach her, and what began as a small misunderstanding would soon escalate into a pivotal moment that would challenge Samantha's ability to remain calm under pressure. Watch the drama unfold, and let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more shocking stories. Maria Taylor, a seasoned flight attendant with a reputation for being thorough and diligent, had seen her fair share of passengers who didn't quite seem to fit the mold of those who usually flew first class. As she moved down the aisle, serving drinks and snacks, she couldn't help but notice the woman seated in 3A. Her calm demeanor, understated clothing, and modest accessories made her seem out of place among the more ostentatiously dressed travelers in the premium section. Maria had no way of knowing, of course, that the woman sitting in 3A was, in fact, the owner of the airline. Maria's curiosity soon turned into suspicion. The woman in the seat didn't fit the usual profile of a first-class passenger, and something about the way she sat there, seemingly unaware of her surroundings, made Maria question whether she had been mistakenly assigned to the wrong seat. Her professional instincts kicked in, and Maria decided to approach the woman to verify her seat assignment. "Excuse me, ma'am," Maria said politely, leaning over the aisle. "Could I please see your boarding pass?" Samantha looked up, surprised by the interruption. She had been quietly reading a book, lost in her thoughts. Without hesitation, she retrieved her boarding pass from her bag and handed it over. "Here you go," Samantha said calmly, not fully understanding why Maria was asking for it. Maria glanced at the ticket briefly before looking back at Samantha. "I just want to double-check that this is your seat. Seat 3A is a first-class seat, and we have a lot of high-priority passengers today." Samantha's eyebrows furrowed slightly, but she didn't lose her composure. "I'm in my assigned seat," she replied, her voice even. "I paid for the ticket, and this is where I belong." Maria hesitated, sensing that something wasn't right, but decided to leave it at that for the moment. She handed the boarding pass back to Samantha and moved on. However, as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her suspicions had been raised, and she was determined to get to the bottom of it. After all, it was her job to ensure that the right passengers were in the right seats, and no one was above questioning. Little did Maria know, the woman she had just approached wasn't just any passenger, she was the very one who had created the policies and the luxury services Maria was tasked with delivering. And, in the next few moments, Maria would come to realize that her assumptions about Samantha were completely misguided. As the minutes passed, the quiet tension in the cabin grew. Samantha continued reading her book, trying to shake off the brief interaction with Maria. She was used to questions. People often assumed she wasn't the owner of the airline because of her unpretentious demeanor. She had long learned to shrug off these small, occasional inconveniences. It wasn't the first time someone had questioned her place in the world based on how she looked, and she wasn't about to let it ruin her peaceful journey. However, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease, a nagging feeling that perhaps Maria wasn't finished with her. Sure enough, about an hour into the flight, Maria reappeared. This time, she looked even more determined. Her posture was straighter, and her eyes focused squarely on Samantha as she made her way down the aisle. The other passengers were starting to take notice, sensing that something was amiss. Samantha's calmness only seemed to heighten the anticipation. What was going to happen next? "Ma'am, I'm afraid I'll need to ask you to move to another seat," Maria said, her tone less friendly this time, more forceful. "There's been a mistake, and your seat assignment doesn't match your profile." Samantha raised an eyebrow at this. "I'm sorry, but I'm in the seat assigned to me." "There's no mistake." Maria hesitated, glancing around the cabin, before speaking again. "I'm afraid I'll have to involve security if you don't comply," she said, her voice now carrying a note of finality. Samantha's heart skipped a beat. She was no stranger to difficult situations, but being treated like an imposter on her own plane, by someone who worked for her, was something she had never expected. She knew what she had to do. This wasn't about the seat, it was about respect. Samantha took a deep breath and reached into her bag to retrieve her phone. She called her company's headquarters to report the incident, making sure to mention her name and position. "I own this airline," Samantha said, her voice firm and unwavering, as she made the call. "I'm sitting in my designated seat, and one of your flight attendants is trying to force me out of it." The moment the words left her mouth, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted. Maria's face turned pale as she realized who she was dealing with. She stammered something in response, but Samantha wasn't listening. She had already made it clear that this wasn't just about the seating arrangements, it was about how Maria had treated her based on preconceived assumptions. No longer concerned about maintaining a low profile, Samantha knew this situation needed to be addressed publicly. By the time the plane landed, the tension had dissipated. But for Samantha, the encounter served as a stark reminder of how easily people could make assumptions based on someone's appearance. And for Maria, it was a humbling experience, one that would stay with her for a long time. It was clear that in business and in life, you should never judge someone based on how they looked or what you thought they represented. Everyone, no matter their appearance or status, deserved the same respect. The flight attendants who had witnessed the exchange would carry this lesson with them for the rest of their careers, and Samantha would continue her journey with a renewed sense of determination to lead by example. No longer just the owner of a successful airline, she was now the leader of a movement, one that would not only change how the airline was run but also how people saw themselves and each other in the world. The confrontation had created a palpable shift in the cabin. As the flight attendants, now fully aware of the identity of the woman sitting in seat 3A, moved quietly between the aisles, a sense of unease lingered in the air. Samantha Hayes, while outwardly calm, felt a simmering anger within her, the kind that often arises when your professional integrity and your identity are questioned. The arrogance with which Maria Taylor had assumed Samantha's right to be in first class had shaken her in a way she hadn't anticipated. Samantha sat back in her seat, folding her hands neatly in her lap. The quiet hum of the airplane's engines provided a constant background, but her mind was racing. As a leader, she was used to challenges, but this was different. This wasn't a business decision or a tough negotiation, this was personal. And yet, Samantha knew she had to maintain control. If she responded in anger or frustration, she would only prove Maria's assumptions about her, and that was not an option. The minutes felt like hours. The weight of the situation pressed down on her, but she remained still, refusing to give in to the discomfort. She could see passengers looking toward her, some confused, some with a hint of judgment, but she wasn't about to let them see how deeply this had affected her. She was the owner of the airline. Her presence here wasn't a mistake. She had earned her place in that seat, just as much as anyone else on the flight. A few moments later, another flight attendant, Rachel, approached her seat, her expression polite but cautious. Samantha looked up at her, her eyes locking with Rachel's. Rachel paused for a moment, as if gauging the situation. "Ms. Hayes, she started, but Samantha held up a hand. "I'm fine," Samantha said firmly. "But I want this to be addressed properly. Maria's assumptions are not only wrong, they're harmful. And I'll be addressing this with corporate once we land." Rachel nodded, a slight expression of relief passing over her face. She understood the gravity of the situation. "Of course, Ms. Hayes. I'll speak with Maria and ensure this doesn't happen again. I apologize for the inconvenience." Samantha gave her a small nod, appreciating the professionalism in Rachel's response. She had expected a more defensive stance from the flight attendants, but Rachel seemed to grasp the seriousness of the matter. This wasn't just about the seating assignment, it was about respect. The small misstep had escalated into something larger, something that would reverberate throughout the airline. As the flight continued, Samantha tried to return to her book, but her mind kept drifting back to the interaction. She knew this would be something she would have to deal with when the flight ended, but more than that, she realized that this incident was an opportunity. If she could use her position and her experience to show others that their assumptions based on appearance were flawed, she could initiate change. The moment she had been confronted was uncomfortable, yes, but it also had the potential to change the way the airline operated, how the company would approach customers, and how it would ensure that no one else would be made to feel like they didn't belong. As the plane began its descent, Samantha allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. She had come so far in her career, overcoming doubts, biases, and expectations. The road ahead was still long, but she was determined to keep pushing forward, to challenge the systems that perpetuated judgment based on appearance, and to ensure that her company represented the values of inclusivity, respect, and fairness. After the flight landed, the tension between Samantha and the flight attendants lingered, but the issue was far from over. As she disembarked, she was met by her assistant, Clara, who had been briefed on the situation by the corporate office. Clara's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the weight of the situation. She could see the deepening concern in Samantha's eyes. "Are you okay, Ms. Hayes?" Clara asked gently as they walked through the terminal. Samantha took a deep breath, her shoulders slightly tense. "I will be. But this isn't just about a seating issue. It's about how people are treated based on what they expect of others." Clara nodded. "I understand. But you've got the whole corporate office watching now, waiting to hear how this gets handled. I know it's frustrating, but this could be a real opportunity to make some changes, to show everyone the direction we want to go." Samantha was quiet for a moment, considering Clara's words. As much as she hated to admit it, Clara was right. This wasn't just a personal affront, it was a moment that could define how the airline viewed itself moving forward. The next day, Samantha called an emergency meeting with the senior leadership team, including the heads of customer service, human resources, and operations. They gathered in the company's boardroom, and the atmosphere was tense as everyone waited for her to speak. The incident with Maria had already become a talking point, and the pressure to handle it correctly was mounting. "Let's address the elephant in the room," Samantha began, her voice calm but firm. "Yesterday's incident was unacceptable. Not because of the seating mix-up, but because it exposed a systemic issue within our company, an issue of bias, assumptions, and a lack of respect." There was a murmur of agreement from the group, but no one dared to interrupt. Samantha continued, her gaze steady on the room. "I understand that mistakes happen, but what happened yesterday was more than just a mistake, it was a reflection of the attitude that still exists within the company. A belief that people are judged based on their appearance, not on their position or merit. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. Maria didn't recognize me, but more importantly, she didn't stop to ask herself if her assumptions were right. She simply acted on what she thought she knew. And that can't happen here. The room fell silent. Samantha's words were clear, and there was no denying the seriousness of the situation. She knew this was going to be difficult to fix, but it was necessary. She wasn't willing to let the company slide into complacency, especially when it came to treating people with respect. We need to address this, not just with Maria, but with every level of the company. Training on cultural competency, respect, and inclusivity has to be mandatory. No one should feel like they don't belong here. And we need to ensure that we're practicing what we preach. After a lengthy discussion, the leadership team agreed on a plan of action. They would begin with an internal audit to identify areas of bias and disparity within the company, followed by a mandatory training program for all employees. They would also develop a public-facing initiative to demonstrate their commitment to diversity and inclusion. Samantha left the meeting feeling a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. She knew this was just the first step, but it was an important one. The changes she had envisioned for the airline were beginning to take shape, and this was just the start of the cultural revolution she was determined to lead. Later that day, Samantha received a call from Maria. The flight attendant, now aware of the magnitude of her mistake, had requested a meeting with Samantha to apologize. "I want to express my deepest apologies for how I treated you yesterday," Maria said over the phone. "I didn't realize who you were, and I made an assumption that was completely wrong. I'm sorry for the disrespect I showed." Samantha took a moment to consider Maria's words before responding. "Maria, I appreciate your apology, but this isn't just about what happened between you and me. This is about a larger issue within the company. It's about understanding that assumptions based on appearance have no place here. We're going to work on this, and I hope you'll be part of that process moving forward." Maria agreed, and the two of them ended the call on a positive note. Samantha hung up the phone and sighed, knowing that change, while difficult, was within reach. It wasn't just about fixing a mistake, it was about building a company where everyone, from the top to the bottom, felt valued and respected. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, training sessions, and strategic planning. Samantha found herself deeply immersed in the work of transforming her company's culture. She was no longer just the owner of an airline, she was a leader on a mission, and that mission was about more than profits or luxury services. It was about creating a company where fairness, respect, and inclusivity weren't just ideals, they were the foundation of every decision made. The mandatory training program that the leadership team had outlined was rolled out company-wide. Employees from all departments were required to attend workshops focused on cultural sensitivity, unconscious bias, and the importance of fostering an environment where everyone felt welcome. While some employees were hesitant at first, others embraced the opportunity for growth, recognizing that the changes weren't just for the good of the company, but for their own personal development. Samantha personally visited several training sessions, speaking to employees about her vision for the future. She spoke candidly about her own experiences as a woman in business and the challenges she had faced along the way. She encouraged employees to speak openly about their experiences with bias and discrimination, and she emphasized the importance of being allies in the workplace. One afternoon, after a particularly impactful training session, Samantha was approached by a young employee named Maya, who worked in customer service. Maya had been quiet throughout most of the session, but she now seemed eager to speak. "Ms. Hayes," Maya began, her voice uncertain. "I just wanted to thank you for this. I've never worked at a company where this kind of training was prioritized. It's made me think a lot about how I interact with people, and how I can do better." Samantha smiled warmly, her eyes softening. "Maya, it's people like you who are going to make the biggest difference. I'm proud of the progress we're making, but it's going to take all of us working together to create real change." Maya nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. As she walked away, Samantha couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. The work wasn't easy, but it was beginning to take root. And for the first time in a long while, she felt like the company she had built was truly aligned with her values that centered around inclusivity, fairness, and respect for every person, no matter their background or appearance. The transformation was still in its early stages, but Samantha knew this was a turning point. The company was no longer just an airline, it was a symbol of what could be achieved when you led with purpose and integrity. And that was something worth fighting for. The days following the board meeting had been full of action for Lena Montgomery, but her resolve had never been stronger. As the owner and CEO of one of the most respected airlines in the country, Lena knew that the real work was just beginning. The discussions had been intense, and while there had been noticeable improvements in how the company operated, Lena was clear that systemic change in the airline industry could not be achieved overnight. The work ahead required long-term commitment, consistent effort, and a clear vision. She had spent years building her airline from the ground up, working tirelessly to maintain high standards for safety and customer service. But now, her focus had shifted. The recent incident with the flight attendant had underscored the need for her to use her platform not just to elevate the quality of the service, but to address the culture within the airline itself. Lena had always believed in diversity, inclusion, and the ability to make people feel respected, but now she was committed to ensuring that these values were embedded in every aspect of the airline's operations. Lena was in her office one afternoon when her assistant, Clara, entered with a stack of reports. Clara, who had worked with her for several years, was a trusted ally. She had seen Lena go through some of the toughest moments in her career, and Lena valued her input immensely. "Lena," Clara began, setting the reports down on the desk, "I've reviewed the results from the first round of diversity training, and while the numbers show some improvement, it's clear we have more work to do." Lena nodded, glancing at the reports. "I figured as much. There are always growing pains when we push for real change. But the first step is making sure people are aware of their biases. That's what we're tackling now." Clara paused, as if carefully choosing her words. "I agree, but I think we need to take it a step further. We can't just train the employees. We need to make sure this change is reflected in our leadership. Our senior management team needs to lead by example, and I think they need more support in addressing these issues, not just for the company's culture, but for their own growth." Lena's eyes widened slightly as she took in Clara's words. She had always known that leadership was about setting an example, but Clara's comment struck a chord. She had expected resistance from the lower ranks, but the true challenge lay within the leadership team. If they were not on board with the changes, it would be impossible for the culture of inclusivity to permeate throughout the company. "You're right, Clara," Lena said, the wheels in her mind beginning to turn. "We can't afford to let the people at the top remain resistant to change. I'll address it directly. We need a clear action plan, not just for our employees but for our leaders." Clara nodded, sensing the determination in Lena's voice. "I think that would be a game changer." That evening, Lena drafted an email to her senior leadership team, requesting a meeting to discuss new initiatives for leadership development and diversity. It was time to raise the bar for her top executives. They had to embrace these values, or they risked the future of the airline. As the days went on, Lena began to see the tangible effects of the culture shift. Employees were beginning to speak up more about their experiences with discrimination or bias, and the new feedback system allowed them to share their thoughts with a sense of security. The first round of leadership training was set to begin in a week, and Lena was determined to make it a turning point for the company. Despite the positive signs, Lena was well aware that the journey ahead would be long. But she was committed to ensuring that this was just the beginning of a lasting transformation. She had already made a name for herself as a leader who never backed down from a challenge, and this was no different. With the support of her team and the new leadership initiatives, she was certain they could build a company where everyone, no matter their background, felt valued and respected. The months that followed were a testament to Lena Montgomery's commitment to systemic change. The airline's diversity initiatives had begun to take root, with new leadership training, mentorship programs, and employee resource groups becoming central to the company's culture. The initial resistance, particularly from senior management, had begun to dissipate. The leadership team, after a series of discussions and tough conversations, had come to understand that their survival as leaders, and the success of the airline, depended on their ability to adapt and evolve. Lena had witnessed a subtle shift in the attitude of some of the senior managers, those who had previously been skeptical of the changes. Where there was once hesitation, there was now open dialogue. Conversations that had once been uncomfortable had transformed into opportunities for growth and development. Lena had led the charge, not just by implementing new policies but by making herself vulnerable in the process. She was open about her own challenges with confronting bias and always maintained a sense of humility as she pushed for deeper conversations about privilege and inequality. The results were noticeable. In the company's latest employee satisfaction survey, a significant increase in trust in management was reported. Employees felt more empowered to share their experiences and were encouraged to contribute to shaping the future of the airline. The mentorship programs had helped to elevate voices that had been overlooked in the past, and new leaders, diverse in background, gender, and experience, were emerging at all levels of the company. But even as the culture shifted, challenges persisted. Some employees, particularly those in senior positions, had grown accustomed to the old way of doing things. There were still whispers of resentment, particularly among those who felt that diversity initiatives had disrupted the company's previous success model. Some questioned whether inclusivity efforts could coexist with the airline's long-standing reputation for excellence and profitability. One afternoon, during a routine check-in with her HR team, Lena encountered an employee who had voiced these concerns. Ethan Thompson, a senior manager in operations, had been with the airline for nearly 2 decades. He was well respected for his work ethic but had never been fully supportive of the changes Lena was advocating for. "I don't think you're seeing the full picture, Lena," Ethan said, his voice calm but firm. "I get that we're trying to be more inclusive, but we've always thrived because we hired the best people. Now we're making things too political. I just don't think it's sustainable." Lena listened carefully, allowing him to voice his concerns without interrupting. She had anticipated pushback, but she also understood that change was hard, especially for those who had found success in the old system. "I understand where you're coming from, Ethan," Lena replied, choosing her words with care. "But let me be clear, this isn't about compromising on excellence. This is about broadening our definition of excellence. It's about recognizing that the best talent isn't limited to one group of people. It's about seeing potential where we haven't before. Diversity and inclusivity are not distractions, they're essential to our long-term growth." Ethan seemed to soften a little, but he remained unconvinced. "I get that, but are we really ready to risk our success for something that might not pan out?" Lena stood up from her desk, walking over to the window that overlooked the airport. She gazed out at the planes coming and going, the bustling energy of the terminal below. "Ethan, I've been in your shoes. I've heard these arguments before, but the truth is, the world is changing. Our industry is changing. If we don't change with it, we'll be left behind. Diversity isn't just a buzzword, it's the future." There was a long pause. Ethan was quiet, his expression thoughtful. He didn't respond immediately, but the wheels in his mind were clearly turning. Lena returned to her desk and sat down, facing him. "I'm not asking you to agree with everything all at once, but I do expect you to be part of the solution. We're all in this together, and we need every one of our leaders to champion these changes." Ethan nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I'll think about it, Lena." Lena didn't push further. Sometimes, she knew, it was enough to plant the seed. The process of change was never easy, and she understood that it would take time to win everyone over. But as long as she had people like Ethan willing to engage, she knew there was hope for the airline. By the end of the year, the impact of the initiatives Lena had put in place was undeniable. The company was thriving, with higher employee retention rates, a more diverse leadership team, and increased customer satisfaction. But for Lena, the real victory lay in the people who had begun to embrace change, those who had once been skeptical but were now active participants in shaping the future of the airline. Lena had always known that true leadership meant driving change, even when it was difficult. And now, she could see that the seeds she had planted were beginning to grow into something lasting, a legacy of inclusivity, respect, and excellence that would endure for years to come. The next year proved to be even more transformative for Lena Montgomery and her airline. With the culture shift deeply embedded within the company, it was time for Lena to focus on making the changes visible to the world. She knew that true transformation required not only internal commitment but also public recognition. It wasn't enough for her to lead a company where employees felt safe and respected, she wanted the world to see the example her airline was setting. Lena began by championing a partnership with a nonprofit organization dedicated to improving diversity in aviation. It was a move that would position the airline as a leader not only in the business world but in societal change as well. Through this partnership, the airline would offer scholarships to young people from underrepresented backgrounds, providing them with the training and resources they needed to pursue careers in the aviation industry. The media coverage surrounding the announcement was overwhelming. Lena appeared on several major news outlets to discuss the new initiative, speaking passionately about her commitment to breaking down the barriers that prevented many talented individuals from entering the field. "The future of aviation is diverse," Lena said during one interview. "We can't afford to continue overlooking talent simply because it doesn't fit a certain mold. Our industry is evolving, and we have to evolve with it." The response from the public was overwhelmingly positive, but the shift was not without its challenges. Competitors in the airline industry were quick to follow suit, launching their own diversity initiatives, some of which were more performative than substantive. This only fueled Lena's determination to ensure that her company's efforts went beyond just words. She wasn't interested in simply being seen as doing the right thing. She wanted her company to be a true example of how diversity could elevate not just people's careers, but the entire business. Behind the scenes, Lena continued to work tirelessly with her leadership team to refine the airline's policies. The annual Diversity and Inclusion Report showed continued improvement, but Lena knew that measuring success wasn't just about statistics, it was about the lived experience of every employee, every customer. The real breakthrough came when a high-profile meeting with industry regulators allowed Lena to address the barriers that existed at the regulatory level, which often hindered the hiring of diverse candidates. This was where she saw her most significant impact, not just within her airline but on the industry as a whole. By the end of the year, Lena Montgomery had firmly established her airline as not just a leader in aviation but a beacon for the future of business. Her commitment to inclusivity had transformed not just her company's bottom line, but the broader industry. And as she stood before her team in the final meeting of the year, she knew this was only the beginning of what was possible. Lena smiled to herself. The work was never done, but the future had never looked brighter. The transformation of the airline under Lena Montgomery's leadership had been remarkable. It was a journey marked by both challenges and triumphs, but through it all, Lena had stayed true to her vision. As the year came to a close, she reflected on everything that had been accomplished. The company had not only survived but had flourished in ways she hadn't imagined. It had grown stronger, more inclusive, and better equipped to face the future. Lena sat at her desk in the company's headquarters, looking over the final reports for the year. The statistics were impressive, employee satisfaction had soared, customer feedback was more positive than ever, and diversity numbers were steadily improving. The scholarship programs for young people from underrepresented backgrounds had been a resounding success, with many students now entering the aviation industry with the skills and confidence they needed to excel. But Lena knew that success couldn't be measured solely by numbers. What mattered most was the impact the changes had made on the people within the company and in the broader community. Employees were more engaged, felt more empowered, and were given a platform to speak up. The atmosphere at the airline had shifted, there was now a collective sense of purpose and pride. Samantha Carter, one of the company's senior managers, walked into Lena's office with a warm smile. She had been with the airline for nearly a decade, and during the transition, she had become one of Lena's strongest allies. "Lena," Samantha said, "I just wanted to say that the past year has been nothing short of inspiring. Watching everything come together has been incredible. I can see the difference in our employees, in how they talk about the company now. It's more than just a job for them, it's a community." Lena smiled, feeling a deep sense of pride. "That's exactly what I've been hoping for. It's about creating an environment where everyone feels like they truly belong, where they can grow and contribute. We've got a long way to go, but this is a strong foundation." Samantha nodded, her expression thoughtful. "And we're not just making a difference here at the company. I've seen the ripple effect in the industry. People are talking about us, about what we're doing. It's hard to ignore the changes we're leading." Lena felt a sense of accomplishment. The impact of the initiatives was beginning to spread beyond the company. Their efforts to make aviation more inclusive were slowly influencing others in the industry, from competitors to regulators. They had set a new standard for what it meant to run an airline. As the conversation turned to plans for the upcoming year, Lena's mind wandered to what the future held. There were still challenges ahead, still room for growth, but she felt confident in the direction they were heading. The vision she had for the company was taking shape, and the foundation they had built would support continued success. Samantha stood to leave, but before she did, she paused. "Lena, I think it's safe to say that you've changed the game. You've shown us all that business can be both successful and ethical. And that's something we can all be proud of." Lena smiled as she watched Samantha leave, her heart swelling with pride. This journey was just beginning. There were more lives to touch, more minds to change, and more barriers to break. But for the first time in a long while, Lena felt like the work she had been doing had truly made a lasting difference. As she sat back in her chair, Lena looked out the window, the horizon stretching endlessly before her. She knew that the road ahead would require perseverance and vision, but with a strong team, a clear mission, and the lessons of the past year guiding her, she was ready for whatever came next. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Clara, her assistant. "The press conference is in an hour. Ready to take the stage?" Lena stood, a smile tugging at her lips. The stage was hers, and she was ready to continue leading the way.